Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Looks like a very nice set of dishes behind you there, Carol Ann.
My mom's collection, yes.
Very nice. How are we all doing? Anybody still working on their quiz?
I finished.
Well, I think the quiz is probably timed out about now. Is everybody done?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning. It's 3rd of July here in the US and there. Tomorrow's the 4th of July. Most people have tomorrow as a vacation day, and when vacation days or holidays fall on a weekend, Then they get to take the day before off. So almost everybody here isn't working today. So, but here we are. So if you hear fireworks in the background, it's, those are legal today. So it could be some noises, hopefully not too much. There were last night when we were trying to go to sleep. We have just one quiz left in my portion of this course, and then the one online course quiz as well that's due next week. I wanted to share with you some information about taxes. Not a very fun topic, but a necessary one. Chapter 9 in your simulation manual goes over all the line items in your tax return. We went over the tax return for year one. I'm not going to do that again today, but this is the tax values fact sheet that's been posted on RVLE, and it's also posted on the website for the simulation. So I wanted to kind of go through here and give you an idea of why your tax bills are so high in the simulation. I assume you all looked at your tax bill and probably about had a heart attack. So let's look at what these numbers look like. So in the simulation, you're set up as a self-employed business entity. That means for a self-employment tax, your rate is 15.3% of every dollar you make. You're paying 15.3 cents in taxes. So in the United States, if you are employed by someone else, like I'm employed by the university, the employer pays half of this amount. But if you're self-employed, as I am teaching to you right now, I'm self-employed, I have to pay that 15% no matter what. So it's not a choice. So that's how the simulation is set up. There are business strategies in the United States to help lower some of these taxes we're going to talk about. My best recommendation to you is to work with a CPA or the equivalent in Jamaica who knows business taxes and business structures that can help you pay only what is legally and ethically required in terms of taxes to lower your tax burden. So at any rate, this 15.3% of your profit in the simulation, you owe no matter what, and you owe that amount up to $124,000 of profit in a given year. Beyond that 124,000, you still have to, this amount drops away, but there's a remaining 3% or almost 3% that's paid for Medicare. So this is Social Security and Medicare tax. Once your income threshold reaches a certain level, you don't owe Social Security anymore, but you do owe Medicare forever. That didn't used to be the case. That was changed about maybe 15 years ago. It used to be that when you got to that threshold, you didn't owe this anymore, but Medicare is running out of money, and so they had to tax people who make more to pay for that. In the simulation, you're paying 6% equivalent of state income tax for the level of income you're earning in the simulation. I'll tell you honestly, that's too low. It should be higher. It's higher for me in the state of Nebraska. If you lived in New York State or California, increase that amount to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12%. State income tax is what you would owe. There's some standardized deductions that you can take off your taxes here and personal exemptions. It gets into tax law, but this is amounts you don't have to pay taxes on. Comes off the total profit that you don't have to pay income tax on. So you can see right off the start, for the first $124,000 you make in the simulation as a profit in a given year, you're going to pay 15.3% plus 6%. So that's 21.3% of your profit will be paid in taxes. Now, what I want to emphasize to you is that those numbers are not income tax. Not income tax. We haven't talked about income tax yet, except at the state level. So this is state income tax, Social Security, and Medicare. We haven't talked about what we owe the federal government, which is a whole set of additional taxes. So at the federal level, these are made in brackets. The brackets tax a different percentage based on how much profits you make. And the more money you make, the more money you owe in income taxes. And I would assume that Jamaica's tax structure is fairly similar to this. But once you start making like $150,000 in profit or more, and certainly over 300, you can see the percentage of the taxes go up and up. And these roughly parallel what the tax rates are in the US right now. They change every year and I can't keep up with them, but it's a rough estimate of what you would pay in taxes. And so part of the dilemma that I have every year, right now I'm negotiating with a company in Nevada that would like me to go out and do some training for them. And I haven't been able to do that because of COVID-19. But even once COVID-19 disappears, I kind of have to sit back and ask myself if I want to go earn that extra money or not. Why? Because I know I'm going to get taxed this amount as a percentage and this amount as a percentage. And then since it's going to be in this higher level of income, because I've already got my basic job through the university, I'm probably going to pay another 20 or 22% of federal taxes on that. So let's just say I owe 22% as an example here in federal tax, plus 6% state, 28, and then another 15%. Now I owe 43% of every dollar I make in that consulting role with that organization to the government and taxes. I can do some things with my business, buy a new computer and offset some of that profit, but whatever it shows up as profit, I'm going to owe 43% on the dollar. And then based on our core values, my wife and I would give probably another 10% to charity of that extra income, to faith organizations of some kind. So now after that, you could see that I would actually take home, if you want to call it that, less than 50% of every dollar I make. So then the question is, do I want to do all that extra work, and have another $3,000 show up, but really out of that $3,000, I end up with maybe $1,400 in my checkbook. It's kind of a dilemma that people face here. And you'll face that too going forward. So that's kind of a background about why your taxes are so high. There is a chapter in your textbook, the transition textbook, chapter 10, that goes into a great deal of detail about different business types or business type of organizations you can form in the United States. That's not required reading for you. I don't know what the business forms are in Jamaica. There may be rough parallels, but how you set up your business can help mitigate some of these taxes. But there's going to still be a tax bill no matter what. Okay, we have a short PowerPoint today, so that's kind of nice. I only have 3 more to do, including the one today. I've given permission to Mr. David Harris to interrupt us at any time going forward. So he's scheduled to speak at 10. My guess is he's kind of a structured, scheduled kind of guy. He'll probably speak at 10. But if he shows up earlier, then we'll just pause what we're doing and then move on with him and then get back to whatever we got going on here in class. Okay, today's PowerPoint is on office operations. You've been making decisions in the simulation in these areas. We only got like 10 or so slides to go through, and most of these you already know, so we'll go through them quickly. There are different practice stages. Dr. Willis mentioned this a couple times in a couple of his videos. You are all pretty much in this growth/maturity phase. You're deciding now whether to add more operatories, more staff, and continue to grow, or are you just going to say we're big enough and now we're going to become more efficient and manage efficiencies. Maybe we're going to put a hold on these managed care programs or one or two of them going forward so we don't have all those adjustments to make income that's lost. Maybe we're going to adjust our fees and see what happens, how many patients that we lose. So you're all kind of on the cusp of deciding, are we going to continue to grow, or are we going to work more on maturing as a practice and becoming more and more efficient and effective? Not right or wrong answers. You can probably get to the same point from a financial performance standpoint by either continuing to grow or working on efficiencies. So you just kind of have to decide what you want to do. Eventually, when you get to the point of being having a very mature practice, you may still own the practice as Dr. Holmes does, but you may have people working for you, and that's at the point where your practice is more about personal satisfaction and goal attainment for your other goals in life besides dentistry. Capacity, you know what that is. Number of patients seen versus the number of patients you could see. You've been tracking that number now for 8 quarters. We've been looking at it every single quarter. You know what this concept is. I was shocked when I listened to the news last night. There is a hospital in Houston with the rise of COVID and the second wave in Houston, Texas, where there's a hospital that is at 100% capacity in the intensive care unit. They can't take any more patients. Too many COVID cases. So the capacity is maxed out. A very scary situation, right? If you're sick and that's your nearest hospital. Capacity is determined by the number of operatories you have, what your office hours are. The more office hours you have, obviously, the more capacity you have to see patients. Number and type of staff that you have. Remember, our ratio for clinical staff per chair is 1 per chair, so 1 assistant or 1 hygienist, or a half of 1 each per chair. Many of your practices are at the point now where you're probably going to have to hire another half of a receptionist. Once your patient visits per quarter get between 1,400 and 1,600, depending on your hours of operation, you're probably going to have to add another half of a receptionist. I'll leave that decision up to you. Operator speed obviously makes a difference in terms of capacity, but the simulation doesn't know how fast you are, so that can't really control that. Capacity also relates to the owner's needs and wants and desires and how they want to operate their practice. Dr. Heller, a good friend of mine who co-wrote chapter 12, over which you'll have a quiz next week, when he was in private practice, and he's no longer in practice because of a nerve disability in his hands, but when he was in private practice, he would have a very full schedule, so that he would run 4 operatories at a time, and he would schedule like 4 crown preps within 15 or 20 minutes of each other, 1 at 8, maybe 1 at 8:20, 1 at 8:40, 1 at 9 o'clock. And he would just go from chair to chair to chair, anesthetize, 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 prep, 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 temporize, 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 temporize. And he just wanted to do a lot of dentistry. You may not want to work like that, right? And so your capacity to see patients depends in part on your philosophy. And what office systems do you have in place to manage that the capacity that you have? Simulation kind of assumes that you have systems in place for billing, for making financial arrangements, and so forth. Now, this is a slide I really wanted to emphasize with you. This is from the Blair McGill Advisory. This is one of the recommended newsletters I would suggest you consider buying in practice. I think it's about $300 or $350 US a year. Might be a little less expensive if you get an e-version, but it's now called, I think it's just called the McGill Advisory, because I think Blair has since retired. But this is a monthly newsletter that tracks all kinds of practice trends in the United States. And they survey their dentists once in a while. And I don't think these numbers have changed that much since July of 2004, even though they're getting old. And I want to also emphasize that this is a biased sample. The people who completed these surveys and who subscribe to this McGill Advisory newsletter and do their surveys are among the best of the best dentists in the United States. So these numbers are higher probably than most other practices, if that makes sense, because they're watching their numbers and they're really tracking their numbers, working with accountants, being more efficient. But I wanted to show you here You know, you're tracking your utilization quarter by quarter in the simulation. Well, these are the averages for capacity utilization by specialty. So you can see endo's almost at 92%. And you might think about, well, why that would be. Well, when my tooth number 19 blew up, which it did about 5 or 6 years ago, and it got infected and I'm in pain, do you think I'm going to miss that endo appointment? No, wild horses would have to drag me away from that. All right. So I'm going to go get that tooth fixed because it's hurting. Right. So that's, I think, why endo is so high here in terms of utilization. Patients aren't going to want to cancel when they're in pain. Same is kind of true with oral surgery to a certain extent, right? Don't want to miss that appointment, in part because it is a surgery. You know, it's kind of got that ring to it. Pedo, their success rate is about 88%, general dentistry about 87%, perio about 86%, and ortho about 82%. I think there's a tendency, you know, most of those people who are doing ortho are kids, and then the parents are taking them to their appointments. And then I think there's kind of a philosophy underlying that says, oh gosh, it's just an ortho appointment. I can get my teeth and my braces adjusted, my brackets next week or something like that, and then people don't show up. So you're all in general practices. So realistically, I mean, if your utilization capacity number is, you know, 85 to 90%, that's really good. If it's over 90, it's outstanding. So just keep that in mind as you look at your numbers. How do you increase your patient visits? These mirror your individual demand strategies. You can increase your service mix, which you do in theory in the simulation through CE. You can up your marketing costs, adjust your hours to make those unique or as unique as you can in the market with like Saturday or evening hours. You can loosen your credit policy. You can accept insurance plans or more of them and keep those on full. And your fees may have an influence on patient visits. All of the things being equal based on supply and demand. If you increase your fees, you may have fewer visits from patients. If you decrease them, maybe more visits. Although I think the simulation does not respond to that at a really high level of sensitivity, but those are all options for you to increase patient visits. I've had this discussion with several of your groups around advertising, and I mentioned, I think, most of your groups in our private consults that I think yours is the only class that I haven't had to put a cap on the top level of advertising that's allowed in the simulation. Most classes by now would be having advertising with the same dollars that you're earning, like $10,000, $12,000, $15 in advertising. And I'm thankful you haven't gone down that route as a class. You are increasing it, and that's okay. It's okay to increase it, but you haven't gone wild in terms of increasing it. So a rough number in advertising, if you take your collections number and multiply it by 2 or 3%, and your advertising is around that range, that's pretty reasonable. So if your collections are 200,000, it's not unreasonable to advertise $4,000 or $6,000 per quarter. So short PowerPoint, lots of these decisions you've been going over before. So a lot of that's just kind of review of what we've been talking about previously. Questions about that or about taxes? Okay, I would suspect that we'll have David Harris joining us at 10 o'clock. It's about 9 o'clock now, so I think we'll go ahead and start with our consults for quarter 9 decisions. Remember, from quarter 9 on, you need to fill out your Excel file for your financial analysis, and you'll turn that in at the end of the simulation next week on, I think it's due Thursday sometime. I think we'll change the order in which we do consults today. Let's begin. We'll begin with Ashley and Larissa, then move on to Anissa and Janae, then Bogdan and Leah, then Gervais, and then Lisa and Carol Ann. I'm going to begin cutting you loose in terms of consults. So for the consults for the consults for quarter 9 will be 3 questions. So look at your results and narrow down your questions that you want to ask to 3 questions. On Monday, you can ask 2 questions for quarter 10, and for quarter 11 and 12, I'm expecting you to fly as the bird out of the nest and manage your practices by yourself without consults. All right, so kind of cutting the strings here, but I'll help you in the next couple of quarters on a limited basis. So take a look at your results. I'll set up the Zoom rooms. And if for some reason David Harris would join us before 10 o'clock, would somebody text everybody or just let people know or shoot me an email and it'll show up here and I'll be able to move out of those consults and start with Mr. Harris, whose presentation I think you'll find entertaining and enjoyable and educational as well. Remember, going into the end of quarter 9 and the beginning of quarter 10, you need to have enough money to pay your tax bill, your very high tax bill. So look at your cash situation, your accounts receivable, and do the same formula that you've been doing before in forecasting your cash, except you have to account for the fact that that tax will be coming out of the end of quarter 9 before I compute quarter 10. So as a result of your decisions through the end of quarter 9, you have to have enough money there to pay your taxes. All right, if you don't, the simulation will go into your bank account and take the money anyway, but it'll charge you a penalty if you don't forecast accurately because it'd be an overdraft on your account. All right, so I will start